So, winters of the American Revolution. Let's begin. A little background, as you mentioned, I have expertise from the 1600s, back to the 1500s actually, through the 1800s, hurricanes, blizzards, heat waves, droughts, dark days. There's been a handful of dark days in the history of New England caused by forest fires or volcanic ash aloft. Freshets. Does anybody know what a freshet is? A flood. And tornadoes of New England. And also disasters, and I know it sounds morbid, but the Great Fires of Boston. Stephanie Chereau wrote a marvelous book, changed my life, called Boston on Fire. I recommend it to everybody here. I'm going to be interviewing her in this coming season to do a CD as well. Earthquakes, as Ellie mentioned, Dr. John Ebel from Boston College, very eloquent speaker. Pandemics, we've heard a lot about that. Ship and train wrecks, monsters, and I categorize them as witches, hoodlums, pirates, errant wild animal sightings, and my favorite, astronomical phenomena, namely meteor showers of antiquity, comets, eclipses, solar flares, and aurora borealis. I have a couple of websites that I'll be rolling out shortly, historicalweather.org and newenglandfolklore.org. Sir, one of the rules of engagement are questions after the presentation only. But thank you for getting me to bullet number 1. Also, we're not going to have any public global warming discussion. It seems to get too highly charged, industrialized, politicized, so I will not be fielding questions about global warming tonight. Cell phones off, please. Take note of the fire exits right here. Stay for refreshments. The Historical Society of Watertown has put up a nice array of refreshments. And of course, sign up for the mailing lists in the back. And if you have any questions, by all means, email me at historicalweather@hotmail.com. And again, thanks to the Public Library, the Lincoln Minutemen, and the Historical Society of Watertown. This is the order of battle, so we have to pack our haversack. We're going to look at a prelude to the Revolution, the most modern winter in memory. We'll go to Quebec with Arnold and General Montgomery. We'll go down south with the snow campaign. We're going to go on the Knox Cannon Train and drag the sledges with Henry Knox. We'll cross the Delaware with His Excellency. We're going to freeze at Valley Forge. We're going to talk about a monstrous snowstorm called the Hessian Storm, or the McGee Storm up here in Boston. The most hard, difficult winter is 79, 80. Some of the stories I'm going to tell you are just going to make you get cold. Then some favorable winters in the early 1780s. And we're going to be talking about the 13 colonies. I have weather accounts that stretch them from Georgia all the way up into Maine and Canada. The 13 colonies, as you know, were fighting for independence, and that began on April 19, 1775. What's the impact of winter on warfare? Well, mobility is hindered due to slippery conditions. Okay? Provisions are scarce. It's very difficult to obtain food and to keep supply lines going if you're a mobilized army. Paths are impassable, and people forget in winter you think about the hard, rutted paths, but once the thaw comes, you could be knee-deep, waist-deep in mud. Staying warm is obviously the most important thing in a winter. We've had some frigid weather over the past 2 weeks, but that's the most difficult thing, is to stay warm. And of course, your weapons are the operational. If they get wet, they freeze up, they don't operate correctly, and it can cost you your life. Building hardships, i.e. where you're going to sleep, getting a good place to sleep, getting a good night's sleep is very difficult. And of course, cold brings in disease, it brings in frostbite, and it really can depress you as morale can be hit. So some excelled in winter, and the colonists. Does anybody know what this marker is? And Kay and Ellie, you can answer this question, or Carl, or Bob.
I can't answer.
All right, Bob, what is it? This marker.
It's Washington past here.
That's correct.
In front of the library.
That's right, Kay. Ellie mentioned a nexus of history. Right outside, folks. On a better night, perhaps, you should take a look at this marker. Joyce Kelly from the Historical Society emailed me today. We figured out from the book that Washington marched by here on Sunday morning, July 2nd. I do know from the records of Dr. Nathaniel Ames that it rained in the afternoon. So Washington marched by here. It was a muggy day. The wind was blowing from the west or southwest. We also know that he went to Coolidge Tavern, probably imbibed his favorite drink, which was rum punch, fancied a waitress there, had something to eat. Then he met up with Dr. Joseph Warren, James Warren, who apologized for the ragtag army that he was going to be inheriting. They had some prayers, I guess, to the higher deity, and then he moved on to, this is at the meeting house, and then he moved on to Cambridge that day and stayed at the Longfellow House. The next day, July 3rd, he went under on the Cambridge Common and assumed command of the army. So His Excellency marched right by here. And of course, he found out there were small groups and enclaves of smallpox as he marched into Massachusetts. He was, of course, immune to smallpox. And he's 275 years old today. And when you read, has anybody read 1776? David McCullough, excellent book. Brilliant man, he's brought history back into the commercial forefront. I've read so much about George Washington, and although I disagree with some of his tactics in the French and Indian War, he was a brilliant tactician and a good commander. Not the best army general like a General Patton, but he knew how to retreat, he knew how to restrain himself and when not to attack, and because of his patience, that's what won the revolution. A brilliant man, and you'll find out he was a good weatherman. He knew his area because he was a Virginia farmer. So to George Washington, we say thank you and we say happy birthday. So we look at the walk up to the Revolution, and I picked out some events that I just wanted to preface before we moved into the winters of the Revolution, namely the Boston Massacre, the Washington and Jefferson snowstorm, which was an epic snowstorm that happened in 1772, a snowy March of 72, the Boston Tea Party. I've uncovered some facts that you might find interesting tonight, a white rain in Florida, and then a snow day in Maine. I thought about the Boston Massacre, and you know this, by the way, watch your step tonight. It's going to be freezing up. But you see those hard chunks of ice, the kind that you can't kick out, you can't get it with a shovel. Well, there was a blizzard on February 24th, 1770, and the dates incidentally I'll be speaking about are the Gregorian calendar, that is the modern day calendar. And there were snowbanks heaped high along the banks. There was over a foot of snow on February 24th. And as the soldiers, there were the hostilities and the tensions were rising, and one of the colonists took a chunk of ice and he whipped it at one of the soldiers and hit him square off the head. That hurts. And that's what precipitated, for all intent and purpose, the American Revolution. Some, yes, you can say the Stamp Act in the 1760s, but it was ignited by a piece of ice plucked and thrown at one of the soldiers. So I found it interesting as I look at some of this dreadful ice that we have on the sidewalks. Well, what happened with the Washington-Jefferson snowstorm? Well, George Washington, as I mentioned, kept weather records in something that he called an account of the weather. Being a planter and a Virginia farmer, he had to take note of weather conditions, whether it was the sky cover, the way the wind was blowing, the temperature, and the light. He and also Thomas Jefferson was a diligent record keeper in terms of weather events. So George kept records up until the day before he died in 1799. And the greatest snowstorm in the history of the lower Potomac Valley, Washington was there, as was Thomas Jefferson. And Washington was at Mount Vernon when it happened. It was January 26th, and this, I quote, "Raw, cold, and cloudy, with the wind, though not much of it northerly." On January 27th, Washington made this entry: "Dreadfully bad, confined to indoors, a snow which began in the night and was about 5 or 6 inches deep this morning, kept constantly at it the whole day, with the wind hard and cold from the north." January 28th, "The same snow continued all last night and all this day with equal violence, and wind being very cold and hard from the northward, drifting snow into banks." January 29th, "Fine, pleasant morning without any wind, but before 11 o'clock it clouded up and threatened snow again all the remaining part of the day, being full 3 feet deep everywhere already. Rid as far as the mill, the snow being up to the breast of a tall horse everywhere." On February 21st, he wrote that he would be shut up for 10 or 12 days during this time at Mount Vernon, and he was low on food at the time and low on rum. Also, there's a marker, has anybody visited Monticello, Jefferson's home? There's a marker on his honeymoon cottage. He was married to Martha on New Year's Day, 1772, and returning from his honeymoon, he ran into the snowstorm. In fact, that they had to abandon their carriage and take a horseback. Jefferson says, "It's the deepest snow we've ever seen. In Albemarle, Virginia, it was 3 feet deep." Jefferson later purchased a thermometer in Philadelphia in 1776 due to his interest in weather, and we know it was 76 degrees on July 4th. And he wrote his book called The Weather Memorandum Book. So it's interesting that Washington and Jefferson have that history behind them. We move to the Snowy March of 1772. It was one of the snowiest marches on record, one of the 6 most memorable winters of the 18th century. Ezra Stiles, who was president of Yale, not at this point, in New Haven, and also he lived in Dighton, Mass. He recorded this in his thermometrical register. March 5th, 4 inches of snow. The 9th, snow. 10th, 8 inches of snow. 11th, snowstorm. 12th, snow, knee-deep in Warwick. 13th, snow. 14th, snowstorm last night, 10.5 inches to 11 inches. 16th, snow, 2 inches. 20th, a violent snowstorm all day, 5 inches. April 2nd, snow at noon. April 3rd, snow, very stormy. So it was snowing that March. And later on in tonight's talk, you'll hear about another memorable March where it actually got below zero during March. Edward Holyoke, who lived in Salem, go figure, March 5th, he said the snow was very high, with very high winds. On the 19th, a very high wind and much snow on the ground. And April 3rd was a very great storm of snow with a great wind out of the northeast. This is the first mention of a northeaster. Professor John Winthrop, one of my favorites at Harvard, had a barometer, and the reading was 28.87 inches. On March 5th, it rose to 28.97, and on the 19th, it rose to 28.99. A man by the name of Edward Sparhawk of Linfield said that an amazing quantity of snow fell in the month of March. He said March 5th, 16 inches, the 9th, 9 inches, 11th, 8 inches, 13th, 7 inches, 16th, 4 inches, and 20th, 15 inches, for a total of 25, 33, 40, 44, 59 inches throughout the month of March. Incredible. Boston Tea Party, December 16th, 1773. When you see these woodcuts, you always see this blazing full moon. The Indians marching out, they went out at midnight, right? And they went on and, no, they went out just after supper. About 6 o'clock is when the Tea Party started, when they marched onto the ships. And it wasn't, reviewing some astronomical records, there was not a full moon. In fact, it was a waxing crescent moon, the new moon being on the 13th. Moreover, this razor-thin crescent moon also represented lunar perigee. That means that the Earth and the moon are closest, and that happened on December 13th, which gave it an incredibly low tide. And if you read about the stories, they dumped the tea over the sides, and they had to keep pitchforking it off and kicking it off because it was coming back onto the ship. There was so much tea, and it was almost waist high. And of course, that was carried out with a high tide all the way down to Dorchester. So my point is that that because of this, it amplified, go to the next slide, it amplified the importance of this event. Had this tide not been exceptionally low, perhaps it wouldn't have been as dramatic, the scattering of the tea across the harbor. And we also know that there were scattered showers that night, and it was cloudy. So I wanted to dispel this myth. And also cool but not freezing temperatures. And the reason why I bring that up is they got to discard their waistcoats. They could go down there dressed as Mohawk Indians and do their business. Now, when you hear about white rain, you think about shampoo, right? That old shampoo, that's common shampoo. But if you look at the Spanish explorers that visited the Floridian coast in the 1600s, they had heard Seminole and ancient early Americans that lived there talk of a white rain. Well, in Florida in 1774, and we had one recently at the end of 2006, I believe, where it snowed. There's snow in San Diego this year. It's been a while with Hawaii, Austin, Texas. The only such instance mentioned by Anglo-Saxon writers until 1800 was in 1774. John Lee Williams says, in 1774 there was a snowstorm which extended over most of the Florida territory. The ancient inhabitants, the Seminoles, still speak of it as an extraordinary white rain. It is said to have done little damage. And finally, we're not out of the woods until May in New England with snow. And there was a May 4th, 1774 snowstorm. On that day, it snowed in Philadelphia, New York City, Virginia, parts of New Jersey, and in southern New Hampshire. Reason why I left out Boston here is because it was sleet. And if you look at ancient records, by the way, they say hail. What they really mean is sleet. Mixed up too. But there were 4 inches in Virginia, 6 inches of snow in Pennsylvania. It was snow with sleet in New Hampshire, sleet and rain in Boston. And according to Dr. Nathaniel Ames in Dedham, he said there was very thick ice this night. So we get to the first winter of our winters of the Revolution. And it's the winter of 1774 to 1775. And of course, Jefferson says we've had the most favorable winter ever known to the memory of man. And as you review these accounts, they're always saying, ever known to the memory of man. It's always one-upsmanship. As the oldest person can possibly recall, this is the greatest we've seen ever. And they always say that about the weather account. So he basically says that this is what Ezra Stiles says, and he says it on March 31st, 1775. It's been the most moderate winter in the memory of man. Same thing as Jefferson. The water from Charlestown to Boston has not been frozen over once this winter, which is seldom the case throughout an entire winter. The British Army has been in great jeopardy lest the country should run in upon them over a bridge of ice. And since the time of freezing has elapsed, become rather more insolent than before. And I guess now's a good time to tell you that they love to attack each other over the ice. You'll see a winter later on when New York Harbor is frozen over where the Continental Army was attacking the British over the ice, and the British were attacking the Continentals over the ice. In fact, as we moved to the winter of 1775 and 76, George Washington so desperately wanted to attack the Shawmut Peninsula, the Isthmus promontory of Boston. He'd go out to the Dorchester Heights and right down at the beach, jump on the ice to see if it was solid enough to carry his army. Luckily it wasn't, because it might have been disastrous. And he wanted to attack over the ice because one British raiding party had done the same. So we've had the most favorable winter, this is Jefferson, ever known in the memory of man, not more than 3 or 4 snows to cover the ground, of which 2 might lie about 2 days, the other 1. The only weather which can be called anything cold was for about a week following the first frost in November. And the Delaware River was open the entire winter, which of course was a rare occurrence. And then we go to Reverend Thomas Smith. He's in Portland, Maine, and he says there's been no snow but little rain since December 29th. Wonderful weather. We saw 2 robins. Jeremy Belknap. Jeremy traveled throughout New Hampshire and Boston, and I'll be referring to some of his information. We'll just hold right here for 1 moment. He says there's been no freezing weather from January 20th through the 28th. Not even during the nighttime. In a Moravian diary in North Carolina, they talk about the weather this year being especially unusual, and it was so warm that by the end of February, the peaches began to blossom. Here, we're talking about Matthew Patton, and Matthew Patton in southern New Hampshire, another one who wrote down, a lot of these diligent researchers, they wrote down everything. They checked the wind, the sky covering, the precip. They didn't have TV to watch. A lot of them will watch the sky at night. They were great astronomers as well as burgeoning meteorologists. Patton says, the most tedious storm of the winter came on April 12th. So be careful what you wish for, saying it's an easy winter. You get hammered on April 12th. With a combination of snow, hail, icy sleet, and rain carried by a cold northeast wind. So they get hit with a nor'easter right in this area on April 12th. Meteorological observers in Cambridge and Salem, and I'm going to say that that's Edward Holyoke in Salem, and in Cambridge it's probably Professor John Winthrop at Harvard, report a mixture of snow, sleet, and rain on both the 11th and the 12th of April. All right, we're going to go up north now. The Quebec expedition. If you look at great engineering feats and marvels of mobilized armies, this is one of them. The Quebec expedition, usually it's one guy who gets all the credit, that being Benedict Arnold. Arnold's route, I see up along the Kennebec, and you wonder, I mean, they weren't primitive during that time, how they had the navigational tools, and they relied on old maps and old scouts who had been up there before along the Kennebec and moved up to Quebec. Meanwhile, General Montgomery went up Lake Champlain, Lake George, we'll talk about that in just a moment, and along the St. Lawrence Riverway, and met up with Benedict Arnold's army. And boy, 1,100 men left Fort Warren, which is modern-day Augusta, on September 24th. 350 miles to Quebec. Only 600 men made it to Point Louis across the St. Lawrence from Quebec 46 days later. Poorly clothed, ill-shod, and undernourished, they endured a cold 3-day rain with hurricane strength winds while en route through the swamps and bogs of northern Maine, the Allagash. Montgomery's army came up through Champlain and along the St. Lawrence. So let's go to October. They just 7th through the 9th, a deluge of torrential rain, and I apologize for the fonts. They work nice on laptops, sometimes not for large crowds, so I apologize in advance, but I'll quickly move through them. Hurricane force winds the 12th and the 14th. 2 separate storms, 2 days apart. Then, 5 days later, the 19th to the 21st, I call it a gully washer. It was a massive freshet. The raises the river 10 feet in less than 3 days. 21st, trees fall, gale force winds increase. 22nd, more rain. 24th, rain, north wind and snow even. 25th, 6 inches of snow, heavy north wind. 28th and 29th, strong east wind, cold snow. They're not even out of October yet. So you can see them battling against the current, moving upstream. And Arnold was a great general, very brave man. He was desperate at the end of the Revolution, and he did sell out America, literally. But no one could ever question how valiant and how brave that man was in leading his troops. He wasn't, as I say, didn't have the best social graces, and some of his men despised him, but there were others that would really lose their lives for him. So it's November, and it's just after midnight. Well, we're talking about, they're waiting it out. They're waiting for some good weather, and General Montgomery's waiting to get all of his troops ready, the supplies ready to mount an attack at the end of December. But they're barefoot, hungry, and exhausted. November 3rd, there's cold and snow. They're 70 miles from Quebec. Their objective is in range, but men are dying. There's bad traveling, knee-deep in mire, snowstorm, very bad storing. It's cold. General Montgomery says, we're going to storm the bastion of Quebec as soon as a good opportunity is offered. And that offer does come on New Year's Eve of 1776. So the best weather authorities were British Lieutenant Thomas Ainsley, who was in the fortification, the citadel of Quebec, and American colonist Caleb Haskell. The 25th was a mild day, they say. Last night everything was remarkably quiet. And during the Revolution, I might add here, is I noticed a lot of dates kept popping up. Early February, the 9th, 10th, the 11th, late January, Christmas, where there was always bad weather, it seemed, happening. Last night it was clear and inconceivably cold. This is December 26th today, freezing beyond expressions. No man can handle his arms in this weather, nor is it possible to scale walls. Now, the day before the invasion, in the night a deserter came in from the rebels. This is Ainsley now. Okay, somebody's given up the Americans here. He warns us to be on our guard for that we shall be attacked this first dark night. And indeed they were. Target, Quebec. So just after midnight, the snow lets up. General Montgomery says at 0 hour at 5 a.m. we're going. And there was no canceling the attack at that point. The storm died out, then it grew furious again. And then rockets were set aloft. And I just want to show you, here's Arnold's attack coming down here. You're going to have Montgomery from here, the British fortresses here. Montgomery's attack sweeps in from here. They fire off rockets. They're sent aloft from Cape Diamond at 5 a.m. to coordinate the advance of the two attacking parties, and they're seen clearly by not only citizens of Quebec, but by British soldiers in the town. General Montgomery's initial thrust had been repulsed, and the American troops scattered in front of their prime objective, their cause lost. Street fighting commenced from 5 a.m. and concluded around 10 a.m. Intermittent snow was light to moderate in the morning, but turned very heavy in the late afternoon. So after the course of the battle had changed, probably 10:30 towards noon, that's when the heavy stuff came down, and it came down heavily and all into the early evening. Sir Guy Carleton says, an assault was given on the 31st of December between 4 and 5 in the morning, during which a snowstorm from the northeast approached. And the fighting, the hand-to-hand combat was fierce. Imagine now, the element of surprise is lost, the advantage definitely goes to the defenders. They knew you're coming, they've got better arms, they're better fed, they're more properly clothed. The numbers do favor, I believe, Arnold's army slightly, but the cause is lost here, and they get thumped. By noon on New Year's Day, the snow lay in 6-foot drifts. The snow impeded the Americans' mobility and visibility of their officers. Half of the attacking parties were either killed, wounded, or captured, and as you can see, General Montgomery was killed, and Benedict Arnold took a ball in the leg. Now, you're dug in, you're caught in a quagmire. You can't get out. You're trapped. They don't want to give up the war. And January, oh, what a January in Quebec. 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, snow, deep and bad storming. Snow, snow, snow. A bad snowstorm so cold that a man can't get out without freezing. Another cold snowstorm, moderate snow, 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 snow. Intensely cold, it's feared that our river will freeze up. High wind with snow in the evening. It's just an entire week of snow. And then watch February, one of the most monumental blizzards that I could find in the history of the Northeast takes place. So it's February now, still bogged down. And again, this great blizzard of February, I want to call your attention. This storm missed Boston. I checked Dr. Nathaniel Ames, I checked Winthrop records. Not even a weird wind, noting that the barometric pressure drops. So this storm, this epic blizzard, completely missed New England. So I'm trying to figure out what the storm track is. I'm not a climatologist, I'm not a meteorologist, I'm a folklorist, but it's amazing. You'll see one in, I believe, the winter of '79 and '80 in Newport, where they talk about something during the Hessian snowstorm, where this happens. But let's take a look at it. It's February 9th. A heavy snow, wind of the northeast. It blew a mere hurricane. Nobody could hold his face against it a minute. In some places, it has drifted 20 feet high. The streets are absolutely impassable. In many places, without snowshoes, the windows of the second stories level with the streets and serve as doors. Everybody's been through. We had two monumental snowstorms, December of '03 and January of '05 recently. So we've lived through some, there's storms of the century that we've had, 2 storms of the century within 2 years. I'm just going to call that out. February 11th, such a storm I believe never was known in New England. And I see that in every storm, right? We've never known it. The 12th, great working parties employed in clearing the ditch and ramparts of snow. One could walk through the embrasures into the ditch on snowshoes, although the foot of the walls in these places 30 feet below the guns, which lay entirely buried. The 16th, even after this day's labor, and again, we're talking a week later, even after this day's labor, a very numerous party clearing away the storm ladders of 14 feet would reach from the top of the bank of the snow to the embrasures. Absolutely incredible. And, in Redfield Parish, New York, recently you heard about them having 12 feet of snow from February 10th through the 19th approximately with the lake effect. I'm sure that's been going on for many, many years because the Oneida Indians, I believe, have tales of many 25-foot snows over a month. But it's absolutely incredible, 20-foot snow drifts. So we moved other storms from history too before they gave up the cause. I mean, you go right from March to May. You get the snow, the rain, back to snow. Here's one that I mentioned about the floods. Streets almost impassable. When it floods in Quebec, it floods in Quebec. When the St. Lawrence blows its banks, it blows its banks. If one steps aside from the sleigh track, it sinks above the knees. Heavy rain, the ground overflowing with water. Bad traveling, the water being in many places 3 feet deep. Then it comes back to snow. And then on May 1st, 4 o'clock this morning, it began to snow nearly 3 inches in depth in the ground. It's not a good place to be. From here we moved down south. Now the snow campaign. Some of you may have heard about, some of you haven't. This is not a lecture on tactics and battle maneuvers, it's basically meteorological focus. But the final phase of the first military action of the War of the Revolution in the southern colonies consisted of some skirmishing between the recently mobilized Carolina and Georgia militia and small bands of British who were assisted by Tories. Those were people that were siding with the British. It was called the Snow Campaign after a pre-Christmas snowstorm, there's Christmas again, dropped a remarkably deep snow cover over the interior of the southern colonies, matching all records kept up to that time. At the camp at Great Cane Break on the Reedy River in western South Carolina, on the 23rd, Colonel Thompson with his detachment and prisoners returned to Colonel Richardson's camp when it commenced snowing, which continued without intermission for 30 hours, covering the ground generally over 2 feet deep. That from John Drayton, Memoirs of the American Revolution. Generally, 18 inches deep. When the Georgia troops were discharged, they had to march 100 miles knee-deep in the snow. That according to Captain Hugh McCall. And some of the young, over here, that, can you go back one? Just picture that. Some of these troops that were involved in this had never experienced snow. They were frightened. There was that white rain that they weren't familiar with. On the night of the 25th, there was a great fall of snow supposed to be deeper on the ground than what had ever been witnessed in the southern provinces. And Georgia was generally 18 inches deep, and from the circumstance, that's why it was called the Snow Campaign. Thomas Jefferson says at Monticello, in December 1775 and January 1776, there was a frost of 4 or 5 weeks' duration, the earth being frozen like a rock the entire time. This killed all of the olives. All right, back to my friends here in Watertown. Some excelled in winter. Does anybody know about this marker? No? One down, Soupy. Yes, Bob.
Henry Knox.
That's right, Bob. Henry Knox. And then, Kate, where is this located? That's correct, right. Henry Knox. We're right off, again, this is the nexus. Henry Knox dragged his sleds right by the Watertown Free Library, right out here on Route 20. Remarkable engineering feat. I think of D-Day. and I think of the Knox, the unmitigated gall, the sheep, to go up there, we're going to go take those cannons, drag them 300 miles and bring them back. General Washington, he was snickered at, Knox was, by all the other generals. You know what Washington said? Go for it. There he is, hammer in hand, Henry Knox. He was 25 years old. Yep. He had a problem with weight his entire life, a bookseller, lost some fingers in a hunting accident. After the Battle of Bunker Hill, he evacuated his wife out towards Worcester. Read about artillery, read about artillery. Voracious reader. Learned he was at Washington's side in all the major campaigns throughout the Revolution. Never gets the credit that he deserves. An amazing man. Moreover, his brother, William, joins, 19 years old. And William's leading the train, 19 years old. Couldn't even tie my shoes at 19 years old, and he's leading the wagon train. So what are the objectives? Well, the Battle of Bunker Hill had been lost, and I think one of the British generals said if we win any more of those battles at Bunker Hill, we're going to lose the war. Let's not have another one. And then the other heights here are at Dorchester Heights. So if you look at Boston Neck, this is all filled in. They carved out Beacon Hill and filled in Back Bay, Boston. And again, after Damrell's fire in 1872, they did more of the destruction to the harbor. But this is all backfilled here. But during the time of the Revolution, there was just a neck there. And the British were in Boston, pilfering it. But they were trapped there, and they had their ships all around here. And we can get on the heights. We could lay a fuselage down on them. So, Knox says, this is what I'd like to do. He says, I'd like to take my brother William. We'd like to go to Fort Ticonderoga, which was taken that previous May by Ethan Allen, the Green Mountain Boys, and Benedict Arnold. Two did not like each other, and the Green Mountain Boys made fun of Arnold to no extent. And of course, there was nobody there at the fort when they came anyways. But they were going to go to Champlain, okay, move it down Champlain, violation of Mandate 4 on my initial slide. They were going to take it down Lake George, and then move right down the Hudson River Valley and across eastern Massachusetts. Now, I look at the Knox expedition, and had it been done winter earlier, the moderate winter, it wouldn't have worked. There would have been mud, not enough ice or snow. Had it been done a year later, 76, 77, when it was really cold, it would have gone quicker. So those are a couple of things that we need to do. But right now you have to understand, why are they doing it? Well, the colonists lacked siege guns and storm troops. And as I mentioned, the artillery could threaten British shipping from only 2 places. When Knox first volunteered his expertise to Artemus Ward, who then Washington said, you're going to help this guy out, General Schuyler, you're going to help him out. In fact, I'm making him a colonel. And eventually Knox ascends to a general's rank. And the idea was scoffed at. It was an operation built on assumptions. And the plan was moved from Fort Ticonderoga, okay, down Lake George, down the west bank of the Hudson as far as Albany, all right, through Half Moon, and then move into Kinderhook, Claverack, Otis, Westfield. And you can actually, if you want to do a great summer trip, I haven't done it yet, but there are markers that you could take from Fort Ty. I recommend that you take your time. There's some great inns. Take you 3 days, 2 days without moving. Some great food too. And you can look up online. It's a great route to take. And in fact, this was revised in 1975. They figured out that new research that he didn't go all the way down this far south, but he actually cut in one in the southeast pattern. So they step off at Cambridge on horseback, he and William. On November 16th, they head to New York City, special mission. They're trying to recruit some troops for the cause before they head to Albany. And they made 40 miles in one day travel. And as I showed, Henry was a big guy. That horse had to stop a few times, but I always use that as an earmark of 40 miles. So how long would it take to go to New York? We tried the Lincoln Minute Man. We were sitting around trying to figure that out. And Carl, if you're going 40 miles in a day, right? And if in New York, it's what, 200 miles? And
About 6 days.
Yeah. So it took Adams 2 weeks to get to Philadelphia for the Continental Congress, correct? Taking his time. So it's not hopping into your car and going 60. And you're there. It's a long, arduous haul, and you're exposed to the elements. A couple of other things here that I wanted to mention is that this is what Knox wanted. He wanted an unfrozen lake here, okay? Then he wanted frozen river, unfrozen river here when he traversed the river here. Then he wanted the river to freeze again. Then he wanted to unfreeze. Then he wanted to freeze again. And then he wanted a complete sled track all the way into Boston. And he got it for all intent and purpose. He did get it. A moderate snow came on November 21st. Temperatures, you have to understand, are generally 10 to 15 degrees colder in the Hudson River Valley than they are in Boston. He kept scant diaries after the Knox train. He kept these elaborate, brilliant diaries, but here he's just jotting down notes, and you'll see where the diary's cut off here. And I had a chance to look at the Massachusetts Historical Society. Still gives me goosebumps looking at it on microfilm and seeing day by day the account. And then he would only write little entries. And what Henry would do is he'd jump a day or 2 days ahead of the cannon train, okay? And he'd set it up. Schuyler will help him out. You know, Schuyler was kind of grumpy about it, but Schuyler set this plan in motion. He got all the provisions for him, got the yoke of oxen, 43 yoke of oxen, helped recruit the men. And Henry would go out ahead of the wagon train. He'd be 2 or 3 days out in front and set up the next day's march and try to get provisions and get people organized so when the cannon train came through, they'd be ready. And it was amazing. I harken back to that picture of the Shama Peninsula where the British were holed up. They didn't know how to experience New England winter. They had never seen anything like it. And nobody gave up the cause. Nobody saw the wagon train and headed out to Boston and told the British. They never knew that they were moving to the Dorchester Heights until it was too late the first week of March, which I find is amazing. So Henry's out there procuring men. He arrives in Albany on the 1st. He meets up with Philip Schuyler, the general, to get sled, rope, oxen, men, boats, and provisions. The expeditionary force reaches Fort George, which is on the southern tip of Lake George. This is on the way up there. On the 5th, they land at Fort Ticonderoga after traveling 33 miles north on Lake George. So the number in his force varies to nearly 150 men to 75 men, contingent upon the location of the cannon train at any given time. The exact numbers are unknown due to William Knox's limited entries in his diaries. 78 pieces were salvageable at Fort Ticonderoga, and again, it's at the southern end of Lake Champlain. Here you go into Lake George. And has anybody been to Fort Ticonderoga? Great place, great drive up there. Great place called Fort Henry there. And so they get to, in December, they get there and they find 78 pieces of salvageable ranging from 4 pounds to the prize, the 24-pounder, the big gun. There are guns, mortars, howitzers, flints, and tons of muskets and cannonballs. Help me out here, my military guys, Jim over here, but the mortar had a more high arcing fire to it. The howitzer, more of a sloping fire, and the cannon would fire more directly dead on. Those were the types, and they were smaller accordingly. And they brought back all sorts of armaments. They did get flints as well as tons of muskets and cannonballs. No powder. On December 6th, at Fort Place Arms Dock near King's Store, they load 42 sleds. And I've seen this, what McCullough says, what other researchers say. Some say 16 brass and 26 iron cannon. McCullough says 13 and 27. 8 brass mortars, 6 iron cohorns, 2 turtle doves, and a partridge. They loaded the guns into 3 types of boats: a scow, a bateau, and a petty otter. I was asked what types of boats they are, and they're the type that float. I don't have any other information on that. They're just different types of boats according to their width and how they lay in the water and their hull. It took 3 days to move the cannon, 60 tons, from the fort to the north shore of Lake George, and Henry left his brother, William, 19, in charge. Mothers, you shudder to leave your 19-year-old in charge of home. I'm sure to go away for the weekend, but in charge of the heavy elements, and boy, he did a great job leading, keeping the morale up, getting the men fed, not overworking them, billeting them, making sure the provisions, getting them up, and he did a heck of a job for a 19-year-old. And of course, things are going smooth. The worst weather that they faced on the entire expedition is on the way down on Lake George. The winds that you'll see some of the diaries, and I'll mention some of them, but the wind that they were hitting, the piercing wind was, they were literally going nowhere, bringing the boats down. They were getting swamped. They had to set ashore a couple of places on Lake George. But Henry says, you know, here's... Sure, we can go down one. Page down. Page down. Page down. There we go.
Sorry.
It's all right. December 17th. And be careful what you say when you're predicting. I have made 42 exceedingly strong sleds and have provided 80 yoke of oxen to drive them as far as Springfield, where I shall get fresh cattle to carry them to camp. He's going to change from oxen to horse. It's at Springfield. The route will be from here to Kinderhook, from Winston to Great Barrington, Massachusetts Bay, out near Tanglewood, down to Springfield. There will be scarcely any possibility of carrying them from here to Albany or Kinderhook. But on sleds, the road's being very gully. At present, the sledding is tolerable to Saratoga, about 26 miles. He concludes, and I put it in red here, beyond that, there's none. I have sent for sleds and teams to come here and expect to begin to move them to Saratoga on Wednesday or Thursday. If that should be the case, I hope in 16 or 17 days, and he's talking just after the first of the year, to be able to present your excellency with a noble train of artillery, the inventory of which I have enclosed. Get some of his diary. And here they come, the yoke, the men. It's just an engineering marvel that they should put it on sleds. And they had scouts that knew the area, and it was a well-known Indian trail, but they brought it down. And he says, in the afternoon, here we go, January 6th, they lose their first cannon. Lost a heavy cannon at Half Moon Ferry. In the afternoon, much alarmed by hearing that one of the heaviest cannon had fallen into the river at Half Moon Ferry. It's the Mohawk. The confluence of the Mohawk. Ice is too thin, so he issues orders to send the remainder of the sleds to a safer crossing. At Slosses, as the ice is so much stronger there than at Half Moon, the usual place of crossing. So this new crossing is on the Mohawk, west of the Hudson, later known as Slosses Ferry. On the 7th, another cannon goes into the drink. The cannon which the night before last came over at Slosses Ferry, we attempted to get over the ferry here, which we effected excepting the last, which fell into the river, notwithstanding the precautions that we took. And I want to tell you, there was a young man that accompanied me named John P. Becker, 12 years old. Kid had his act together. He's with his dad, and he's on the train, and he records, he says, we felt an unusual degree of interest in fulfilling our contracts. In the morning we set out and only got about 2 miles when our horses tired and refused to go any farther. And I got to Squire Fishers, who gave us a breakfast, etc. I almost perished with the cold. It says, my father took in charge a heavy iron 9-pounder, which required the efforts of 4 horses to drag it along. Others had the heavy resistance of the 18-pounders and the 24-pounder to overcome, which required the exertion of at least 8 horses. Again, you got to feed men, you got to feed the beasts of burden. And they lose less than half of that, or half ton beasts of burden throughout this entire trip, which is remarkable. So at Lansing's Ferry near the Mohawk River, the cavalcade tries to cross on the ice to the east bank of the Hudson. They have a 40-foot rope that's tied to the first sleigh tongue. And the noble 18-pounder sank with a crackling noise and then a heavy plunge to the bottom of the stream. The water was fortunately shallow and the gun was recovered. And that's when they abandoned crossing there. So they get it back, they get the camera back, the cannon back. And in Albany, next time you drive by Albany, raise a glass to Albany. Because had it not been for the brave men, women, and children of Albany who came out in awe watching this huge train come through, giving them food, putting them up in their houses at night, giving them clothing, feeding the horses, people just doing what people do to help others, taking care of the animals, and the whole town pulling the cannon out of the river. Had it not been for Albany, the cannon train's lost. The revolution may have been lost because the evacuation of Boston doesn't take place. Amazing. Raise a glass to Albany. So they get into Massachusetts now, and one of the most beautiful quotes he says here, we reached number 1. He's in the Berkshires, referring to Monterey, Mass. After having climbed the mountains from which we might almost have seen all the kingdoms of the earth. And that, for all intents and purposes, the final entry we have of Henry Knox. He goes to Greenwoods, and I want to tell you about this because there's a 12-mile stretch called Greenwoods. It's called because it's dreary and forbidding by dense evergreen forests. And Knox, again, he's going to take all this wagon train down the steep hill full of pine trees. No sweat. He actually thought ahead. His block and tackle idea of the pulley system, he spent hours with Marblehead sailors talking about block and tackle, and that's where he got the idea. And the men wanted to give up the cause. 3 times he had to talk them down. Hold tight, man, hold tight, we can do this. They wanted to quit it and go back to Albany. Some of them wanted to quit. He said, hold tight. And again, the men believed in Knox, and they got it over Greenwoods, which was the most treacherous part of the entire route. I did go by the Albany snowstorm. I want to go back to that. On Christmas Day, there you go, Christmas, that same snowstorm, and you'll see it pop up in different battles of the Revolution of Christmas 1775. They got the only major snowstorm, 2 to 3 feet, depending upon who you speak with. But that's what Knox, it was a godsend for Knox. It laid down the snow track across, down the Hudson River Valley, across Massachusetts, there was the snow, he was good to go. But that was the only major snowstorm that he encountered, a 2 to 3-footer, 3 feet in the Hudson River Valley, more towards 2 feet towards Boston. And of course, as I mentioned, the train's lagging behind, so Knox is at Ticonderoga on the 5th. At the 30th, the train reaches the end of Lake George, so it took them 25 days to bring that down, just 33 miles, which is less than a mile a day. Knox on Christmas reaches Albany, that's where we had that big snowstorm. The Cannon train reaches Albany on the 4th, so they're cutting time now. Knox is about 2 weeks ahead of them. January 9th, the train, Knox is only staying about a day ahead of them at this point in Clay Rack, in far eastern New York. They cross over, they reach Springfield on January 16th. On January 14th, they reach Westfield, and there was a party there. They had great cider. That's what the morale soared in Westfield. The people came out, they had birds, pheasants, a great meal, a great campfire. That was the height of this. It was all worth it, as some of the men said. And again, it was some of the finest cider that they had ever tasted. And again, the people were agog watching this huge cannon train and knowing that this itinerant train was moving through the area. They went to Springfield. They changed over at that point to horses. From there, they went into Framingham. And at that point, in Framingham, January 19th, John Adams observed, he was there, and he temporarily deposited most of the heavier pieces in order to rush the more portable cannon to Washington to Cambridge. So at January 19th, actually when they got to Westfield, they knew they had done it. And that's why a celebration ensued. But January 19th, John Adams commended Knox, saying, brilliant. And again, the morale soared in Boston at that time. And again, at that time, His Excellency Washington, he's jumping up and down the ice right out Dorchester. I want to attack. It just showed so much restraint by not attacking. And again, that's one of the residuals of winning the Revolution. Has anybody seen this marker, Dorchester? I've never been there. I want to go there. Let's make it a field trip out there and check that out. This is Dorchester Heights. That's where they brought the cannon down. Now, people don't know about what Knox spent. And for expenditures, this is a memorandum of expenses. A journey from the camp around Boston to New York, Albany, in Ticonderoga, 55 pieces of iron and brass ordnance. So he's saying 55, I hear 59, I heard 60, etc. It cost 520 pounds to do this. And he came in under budget. He was allotted about 1,200 pounds. Not bad. So if you follow modern Route 23 east out of Great Barrington, you go right down Route 20 and right past the Watertown Free Library and the East Branch, because they took a left up here. Some vital statistics: 59 guns went 300 miles in 56 days. The one gun I want to tell you about this that was lost through the ice of the Mohawk was not recovered for a century. There was a feud between competing families and saw the cannon thrown back into the river in 1909, only to be excavated back again in 1996. The second made it to Boston. It was displayed at the Bunker Hill Monument, recovered and restored, etc. No men lost. 6 beasts of burden were lost. None died on the trail, but they received bills that the horse had passed on, and the horse was no good. Only one major snowstorm encountered Christmas. Let's go crossing the Delaware. Blue is Continental Army. They're holding in Philadelphia. There would be 3 forays, for all intent and purpose, across the Delaware. And when you cross the Delaware, you have the Battle of Trenton and the Battle of Princeton. British are holding Princeton, Maidenhead, Trenton, along the Delaware River, New Brunswick. A place called Port Amboy, which is about here in New York, and then Morristown. But that would be the stronghold of the Continentals, Morristown, throughout the rest of the Revolution. And of course, they hold New York. Washington, I want to attack New York. I want to attack New York. Again, the restraint. We didn't attack New York. We were routed in the Battle of Long Island and White Plains. I'm not going to go into it here, but the miraculous evacuation, the first of miraculous evacuations, took place at the Battle of Long Island, where the Sly Fox Washington saved the remnants of his army. But here's what his plan was. We're going to sneak across the Delaware. We're going to march 8 miles, and we're going to attack the Hessians. Here's the Hessians. It's Christmas. They're going to be drinking a lot. They love to party at Christmas. We're going to attack them the day after Christmas, Christmas night. Whether you be too drunk or too hungover to put up a good fight. He was right. It was shoe-top deep snow in North Carolina and in Virginia. And on Christmas night in Monticello, back to that Christmas night storm that we just spoke about for Henry Knox, 24 inches according to Thomas Jefferson fell in Monticello. And this is similar to the Knickerbocker storm. Knickerbocker storm is an epic storm in the lower Potomac Valley, 1922, named the Knickerbocker storm because the theater known as the Knickerbocker collapsed due to snow on the roof, killed 100 people. I'll be comparing that with the Hessian storm in just a few moments. But you see the great the depictions of Washington here. Here he is scouting the Delaware. He looked at where he wanted to cross, and he just he didn't roll the dice like Henry Knox did. He prepared, and he knew where he wanted to cross. He knew what he wanted to do. The men, keep quiet, don't say a word, and we're going to go. In fact, we're going to go Christmas night. According to Phineas Pemberton, who kept detailed records of weather in Philadelphia, the 26th was a very stormy day with much rain and hail, and snow at times. So, Washington was going to pass on the Delaware side. He's 35 miles west of Trenton at Trap. Jen, can we just recalibrate? I'm sorry, go back. I just want to show people where Trap is because I'm going to see the only opportunity. Trap. I should have pointed that out. In Pennsylvania. It's near Valley Forge, but we're going to go back. Just consider that it's northwest of Philadelphia. So, okay, sorry. Very good. You got to that slide. So here's the battle. They're gonna sneak across here, and then they're gonna break in. And it's gonna be a three-pronged attack. Surround the Hessians, catch them literally sleeping, and run them into an orchard. Take prisoners, take their supply. Hessians, if you don't know, they're brutal. They would show no compassion towards the Continentals. So they'd run them right through in a heartbeat. They're brutal soldiers. They show no compassion whatsoever. And, so this is one that we got in the Hessians, and the columnists mocked them too when they marched it back, which is kind of cool. The famous panic. You probably heard is that male or female? Let's say right. This person here. It's female. Oh, but that's the famous one, Washington crossing the Delaware, and it was 6 o'clock. It's, according to this Washington staff says it's 6 o'clock. It's fearfully cold and raw, and the snowstorm setting in. The wind's out of the northeast and beats in the faces of the men. It's going to be a terrible night for the soldiers who have no shoes. Some of them have tied old rags around their feet. I have not heard one man complain. So they disembarked their longbows. The three corps had to march 8 miles. On the return trip, there was ice flow in the Delaware. The Delaware tended to freeze up a great deal. On the way back, they had their prisoners and also equipment. And then snow was a foot deep on the 27th, and it was bitter cold. So they crossed over, attacked Trenton. They crossed back over to Delaware. Now it's time. They know that the British want to retaliate. General Cornwallis has 8,000 regulars, okay? And he's going to march from New Brunswick through Princeton to Maidenhead on the 1st of January. Well, on January 1st, it's 51 degrees. And you know what that means, along with a hard rain, right? There's mud. There's mud. You cannot move any sort of artillery pieces, wagons, etc. You're stuck there. Melting snow turns the roads to quagmires, making the movement of men and vehicles most difficult. Well, the British, they meet the Americans at Maidenhead and drive them back across the river after some sharp skirmishing on the 2nd. And the protecting force at Trenton was also driven back. And this is the break-ins of Washington. The night of the 2nd, Cornwallis has the old Fox surrounded. We're going to attack the Fox in the morning. He's got his army pointed, sitting across, looking at the Delaware. Washington's army pinned against the Delaware River, and Washington's desperate. He's outnumbered. He's underarmed. He's confined. They're hungry. They're exhausted. He's got a huge, angry, formidable force who wants to defend the Hessians in front of him. And he's surrounded by muddy, impassable roads on each flank and an ice-clogged river behind him. An audacious plan was hatched. He has his council of war. He says, he checks the wind, a providential change of weather is in the making. A cold front moved through the area early on the 2nd. The day was described as fair and windy in the morning and cloudy with sunshine and still windy in the afternoon. A typical post-frontal day in wintertime. But the weather-wise Washington noticed that the wind had held to the northwest all day, and the temperature not rising during the day, but remaining steady near 39 degrees as a continued flow of cold air poured into the area. Surely, this meant a freeze that night. A freeze that would harden the roads into a tractable surface and permit the immobilized army to move. Washington feigned to prepare a defensive stand. He lit huge campfires, had all the men move about to fool the British. British eyes forward, we're coming to get you, Fox, in the morning. Meanwhile, his army packed up their equipment and supplies after midnight in preparation for an end run around the left flank of the British across the creek. A hewed-out, scarcely used secondary road provided the escape route. It ran east-northeastward about 3 or 4 miles southeast of the main post road in British hands near Mercyville. At 4 a.m., the army moved. The mercury dropped to 31 degrees. Washington was right. The new road was frozen solid, but it had badly rutted surface and was full of stumps. But by sunup, Washington's troops were well in the rear of Cornwallis' main army, who were still looking forward. As the wind hit their footprints, they were miles away. The impending frontal assault never occurred. But the advance guard of the 4th Detachment of the Americans, when approaching Princeton from the southwest, came into contact with an equally small column of British regulars moving southward on Trenton Post Road to join the main body at Trenton. A clash took place between Stony Brook and Frog Hollow. This, known as the Battle of Princeton, a hotly fought 45-minute firefight, a very brief battle, with the outcome in doubt until the main force of some seasoned Continentals came on the scene, did what they had to do. So they met just north of Princeton. And after that, they headed to Morristown, where they'd have a toehold and they put a ring around New York City. Check, but not checkmate. This allowed, the successful outcome of this clash allowed Washington to move across Cornwallis' main supply route and threatened to occupy his main base at New Brunswick. So, Battle of Princeton, this is where Washington crossed. Some depictions here of the Battle of Princeton. The Continentals showing up and the men who fought bravely that day. And then they marched proudly to Morristown, where they're... So, let's go down. There was a February 24th whiteout. Philadelphia, February 24th, 2 feet of snow. New Jersey at 15 inches. And Dayton at 18 inches. 30 inches total in the month of February. That according to Ezra Stiles. Black September. I'm not going to get into it, but the Battle of Brandywine and Philadelphia was occupied on the 26th, forcing the Americans to head north. I'm going to go to Valley Forge. 1777, 1778, Valley Forge, Brandywine, Chester, Philly, which are the northwest. Some other towns, Camden, New Jersey, I want to point out here. I know, that would have been Trenton. So here's where the battles are taking place. They're taking place in the mid-Atlantic region, Maine, New Jersey, Pennsylvania area. And they're going to Valley Forge. So we have 2 excellent sources for meteorological data from Valley Forge. Complete weather records. It's amazing. I'm not going to go over line by line with them. 2 records were maintained by Thomas Kuhn, and he owned 2 thermometers and a barometer for daily readings, and another by Dr. Henry Muhlenberg. If you can see the captions, okay, General Green wrote, and this is General Green speaking, even their shelters were but apologies for dwelling places. We'll show the cabins. They were far from weatherproof. The cold winter winds blew through their crevices. The ill-designed fireplaces filled them with eye-staining, throat-choking smoke. Hewed wooden floors. For the most part, the men lay on damp earth, padded by a thin coating of scarce straw. Yet there was some warmth within them from the shelter from snow and rain. I'm going to expedite our presentation here, but Valley Forge, it was a very cold winter. There were 2 severe cold snaps at the end of December. It was 6 degrees below zero, and at the beginning of March, it only got to 8 degrees as a low. And this, of course, does not include wind chill factor. There were 3 moderate heavy snowstorms, 4 to 5 inches on the 28th of December, a deep snow, the deepest of the winter on February 8th, and then heavy rain on the 10th and 11th of February and March 2nd and 3rd when there was enough snow for sleighing in Philadelphia. General Greene says, it's impossible to exaggerate the misery of the troops at this time. One half of our troops are without breeches, shoes, or stockings, and some thousands go without blankets. A quarter of the whole number are unfit for duty because they are barefoot and otherwise naked. The famous one is Washington praying. Shall I tell you this slide of him praying? Go page down. You'll see that. There we go. So he's praying. He prays for relief, and it came on March 12th when spring broke. And we do know that there were warmer than usual periods just after Christmas in 1777. But on March 9th through 10th, the winter broke, and he got his wish. Some of the things learned through the Valley Forge, it seasoned and toughened the Continental Army. They learned how to forge. They didn't require a supply line as the British did. If they could get through this, they could get through anything. And if they were going to quit the Army, they were going to quit it then, and they didn't. And this is where Washington won their hearts, begging them to stay, telling them about the Revolution. This is where the American Revolution, the cause, could have been abandoned, Valley Forge, but it was because of Washington. Baron von Steuben, Wilhelm von Steuben, wasn't a baron, spoke German, a little French. Nobody understood him, but he taught the men about marching, formation, cleaning your weapons, defensive formations, hygiene. I won't tell you what I mean by that, but just hygiene, I'll say it. About formations, getting up early, responding to marches. He put them into a formidable army, and even the British will remark, after Valley Forge, it was an entirely different ballgame. It was a different army that they faced off against. Hessian Storm. I want to just devote some time to this because it's very important. The cold storm of December 26, 1778 had all the elements of a classic blizzard. Very high winds, a great fall of snow, excessive cold. The coldest ever known, I know, according to Dr. Edward A. Holyoake of Salem. No other atmospheric upheaval since the introduction of meteorological instruments, which was in the early 1740s, had measured such a grand combination of extremes of weather elements. Some rival storms that I've researched that I just want to mention here of this magnitude, for what it's worth. Christmas Eve, 1811 in New England. January 19th, 1857. March 12th and 13th, the blizzard of 88. Have you heard about that, 1888? And February 12th and 13th, 1899. Those were some remarkable snowstorms. You talk about the blizzard of 78. Washington, as I mentioned, got some strong points around New York City. I'll get to that in one moment. He had camps in Middlebrook in central New Jersey, north to West Point in the Hudson, east to Danbury, Connecticut, and at the end of February, Elizabeth Drinker in Philadelphia. Notes that it's been many years since we've known a season so forward as this. And again, this is the precursor just before the storm she's talking about. It's for several days it's been very moderate. We have crocuses blown in our garden for a week past, and this day Persian irises are also blown. The apricot trees are in blossom. Some early fruit trees to vegetate a great degree that has been remembered at the season by the oldest men in the neighborhood. In fact, it was so mild during this winter that this is the close winter, the 1778-79 winter, after the Hessian snowstorm, or the McGee snowstorm. We can talk about it. I'll get back to that. I'm talking about this winter of 78-79, after the Hessian snowstorm. So you're seeing crocuses, you're seeing early fruit trees. George Rogers Clark and his men, who had the amazing march across southern Illinois and Indiana to seize Vincennes from the British by surprise. It occurred during the winter breakup when streams were out of their banks and the marshy land overflowing. So it helped this mild winter impacted George Rogers Clark and his band of men to take Vincennes. Had it not been so mild, he wouldn't have been able to do that. Circling back to the Hessian snowstorm, it was known as the McGee storm in Boston. The McGee storm because Captain McGee sailed from Boston, and he was on the armed brig called the Arnold. It sailed from Boston, was cast ashore on Plymouth Bay, Manamet, Duxbury, that area. Northeast gales and storm surge killed 66 of the 100 men. Most made it off and onto the beach, but they froze to death during the night. It was so bitterly cold they couldn't find shelter, couldn't find trees. The sloop General Stark ran aground in Nantucket with the loss of 20 hands. Reverend Chase of Kittery was found frozen solid in the field on the 28th. This is the ring around, sorry I'm circling back, this is the ring around New York of camps, colonial camps that Washington had. The March of 1779, I was talking to you about how mild that winter was, about the crocuses blooming in February. Well, here you go, you had to go and say that. Snow, 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 hammered. Last night we had a snowfall deeper than any we have had the whole winter, and the snow is still falling heavily today. This is a river in Manassas, Cutler, in Ipswich, Mass. A remarkable thick snowstorm the whole day and part of the preceding and the succeeding nights. A great quantity of snow fell, more snow on the ground than there has been at a time for several years. In Bedford, New Hampshire, this is Patton, William Patton. The snow is 3 foot 10 inches deep, and in some places 4 feet deep. And then we get to the hard winter, and we're in the home stretch here. We're just past the clubhouse term, so it's a great audience here. The Hessian storm, I do want to mention, there was a 20-foot snowdrift mentioned by Frederick Mackenzie in Newport. The reason why it was named the Hessian snowstorm is because the Hessians and British were stationed in Newport, and some of the early accounts came out of Newport. And one of them was Frederick Mackenzie. He basically states here that the snow drifted yesterday and last night to a surprising degree. In some places it was thrown up to the height of 20 feet. And there was the last appearance of it. It was so dry and small that whenever the wind found a passage, it carried the snow with it. Snow came in through the cracks of our tents, into our cannons, and into our eyes. Professor Winthrop at Harvard detects during that December 26th, he measures a temperature of 6 degrees on Christmas morning, -8 below zero. Hard winter, 1779, 1780. There's only been one winter in recorded American history during which the waters surrounding New York City had frozen over solid and remained closed to all navigation for weeks at a time. I'm going to go over these bullets here. It was the most hard, difficult winter that was ever known by any person living. Manassas, Cutler. Deep snow, severe cold, widespread suffering from Maine, south to Georgia, west to New Orleans, and then north again to Detroit, the known habitations. New York and Boston Harbor frozen over, and I mentioned earlier tonight about armies attacking each other over the ice. Wild tactic. The height of the cool of 100 years or little ice age that took place circa 1750. Lecture note here. The little ice age was a cold period that began roughly from 1650 through the 19th century, ending in the period about the Civil War. There was the cool 100 years, though, between 1750 and 1850, culminating in some wicked winters, not like the winter of 1697 and 98 or 1740 and 41, but very bitterly cold winter, late winters that hung on, strange cold temperatures in March, etc. And people know about the Year Without a Summer, 1816. Percy Bysshe Shelley, Mary Shelley, that's where Frankenstein came. There was a writing contest because they were, what Geneva was it? They were holed up and they had nothing to do, so they had a writing contest, and Mary came out with the classic Frankenstein. That Year Without a Summer, they think, was due to a volcanic explosion. I thought it was Tambora, it might have been Krakatoa, etc. So, was it? Krakatoa, okay. Some other things here. Compared to landmark brutal winters of 1697 and 1698, 3 back-to-back behemoth blizzards. Back-to-back-to-back behemoth blizzards. Arguably, I have 4 of them, but December 28th and 29th, 18 inches. The 2nd and 3rd, 14 inches, and the 5th and the 6th, 14 inches. 3 separate blizzards. Connecticut measures 42 to 48 inches. December 18th, though, there was a 17-inch snowstorm, so I said there's 4 of them there. And the total snowfall 1779 and 1780 was 95 inches, whereas the next year was only 25 inches. And of course, we're in a very dry year right now here in Boston, where up until a few days ago, Austin, Texas had more snow than we did. New Mexico had more snow than we did. Hartford, and again, Ezra Stiles was at New Haven, president of Yale. In fact, during the McGee Hessian snowstorm, he dismissed the students home. He's a good president. Hartford was below zero on January 2nd, the 8th, the 19th, 13 below, 21st, 23rd, 25th, 16 below, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 22 below on the 29th, the 31st, and it was in single digits on the 1st, 2 degrees, the 5th, the 7th, the 9th, the 13th, the 14th, the 20th, the 22nd. That's cold. That's bitterly cold. Travel ceased, social life non-existent. I'm sure that the count 9 months from then, and the population increased. The thaw came on March 7th, and most bridges were damaged by ice flow. That's another important thing. These wooden bridges, they were all damaged by ice flows in any major river. We're coming right through. We're going to get out of here. A pretty favorable winter, 1780, 1781. Washington's troops are dug in at Morristown, West Point, and in Connecticut. The big event was the White Hurricane that hit the Mid-Atlantic on January 22nd. People were killed by the high winds, falling chimneys, falling trees. 9 inches fell in New York, and gusts were described as wicked. The British fleet was decimated. 7 ships run aground at Hampton Roads, 4 near Long Island, and a mammoth 74-gun ship was lost with all hands at Newport. The next year, we got through 1 year in 30 seconds. See that? 1781 to 82. It was called the New York Freeze-Out, and I kind of coined that after the Bruce Springsteen campaign. But Cornwallis has surrendered at Yorktown. For all intent and purposes, it's over. It's a mop-up campaign. The British are being frozen out in New York City. That comes from Lieutenant Thomas Stanley, who's down in New York City writes. Washington's planning to attack New York from Morristown. Ipswich, and I apologize for the font, Manassas Cutler sees 44 inches in the month of January, 20 inches alone on the snow wallop, as I call it, on January 23rd. On January 29th, 4 below in Philly, 5 below in New Haven, and I question this 22 below in Hartford, the variance of 17 degrees. In Hartford, there's a bone-chilling February, the 9th, 10th, the 23rd, and the 25th, all have single digits. A bitterly cold, record-breaking March, okay? And again, 1782, 10 degrees, 19 degrees, below zero. The 19th of the month, it was below zero. The 20th of March, it was below zero. Single-digit days, the 27th, 28th, 29th, and 30th. So it was a bitterly cold March. Then we go to the final winter of the Revolution. It's called a pretty broken winter because the Redcoats were now evacuating Wilmington, Charleston, Savannah, the entire South. They were getting out of there. A foot of snow on New York. It was the only city that was held by the British on January 10th. Ipswich had 23 inches of snow in January. Manassas Cutler was up there with the ruler. 16 inches from this particular storm. And then February 3rd saw 8 below zero at Ipswich. February 21st had farmers plowing their fields. So just see that, you go 8 below, and then you got 18 days later, a little over 2 weeks, and they're plowing fields, getting ready to plant. Amazing. Just want to mention in closing, the winter of 1783 to 84 was devastating in regards to temperature and snowfall, but the Revolution was over and the colonies were free. So, in conclusion, winters of the American Revolution: severe, 1779 and 80, and 1781 and 82. Moderate, 1775 to 76, 76 to 77, 77 to 78. There was a moderate period of 3 years there. Mild, 78, 79, and 1780 to 81. As I mentioned, my researchers here: Stiles, Patton, Winthrop, Muhlenberg. They made it all easy. I just had to pull it all together. Jefferson, Washington, Cutler, Smith, the Reds of Ritz, Mackenzie, Ainsley, Lane, Haskell, Thatcher, Parkman, Hazard, Holyoke, Rittenhouse, Belknap, and Gaines. Other ones: David Ludlam, the definitive weather historian, he and Frank Lane. Also Stephen Clark, brilliant author, wrote, following their footsteps, a lot of great books, one of the best out there. And Robert B. Hansen, another great historian, wrote the diary of Dr. Nathaniel Ames. My next lecture, email me. I'm going to be doing a speech on the Great Brant Rock Fire of 1941 at Ventris Memorial Library, which would be the actual anniversary of 66 years. And it's going to start tonight. Thank you very much. At this point, I'll take questions, and otherwise we will break for refreshments. Mr. Child.
Just curious, you talk about a lot of winter information. Can you get into any of the heat spells or droughts during this period of time?
I haven't prepared a speech on that. There were droughts at that time. I really, Bob, I do have the data. I haven't sifted through that and orchestrated it into a presentation. But you're right, I just focused on the winters, not the summers, but there were some really devastatingly hot days. And if you saw what I was wearing and what Carl's wearing, do you have a comment on that? And then
Well, just thinking of the Battle of Monmouth was one of the largest engagements where most of the casualties in that battle were from heat frost chasing. And there were some 200 or 300 men on each side that died as a result of that very hot battle.
They didn't have this, did they? That's where they lost it. Are there any other questions?
I'm just trying to understand about the Tea Party and the 16th
It was called a perigee, exceptionally low tide. A crescent moon, waxing crescent moon. Great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming out. You have yourself a great winter. I think the groundhog lied, but we'll see. Thanks for coming out, and please support the Historical Society of Watertown. Take advantage of this wonderful Watertown Free Library, and click on lincolnminutemen.org, Jim. See where we're marching next. Thank you very much.